for some time?
We can. It's 10:30 now. If you like, we can start with the prayers.
Yeah, we can start with the prayers and then.
Okay, so Ram is not here today, Krishna Paniji. So may I request you to say the school prayer, please? Okay. And Malti is here, so she can take over after.
Right.
Yes, Malti? Okay, fine. Sure. All right.
O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is also one with every other.
Thank you, Krishna. Malti?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, fine. Om Bhur Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Om Bhur Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Om Bhur Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityoma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you, Malti. Krishna Paniji, would you like to wait or would you like to start now?
We'll wait for a couple of minutes.
Okay, fine. All right.
Yeah.
Krishna Paniji, is that those 9 points in point form?
He's muted himself.
Yeah. Krishna Paniji? Because I think he was waiting, that's why. So for all those who've joined us, Krishna Paniji is waiting for a couple of minutes for the rest of the participants to join. So just hold on, please.
We will start exactly at 10:35.
All right. Krishna Paniji, small request. Can you do a very short recap of those 9 points?
8 points, yeah?
8 points, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
please. Thank you.
Good morning, all the participants. As I mentioned in the previous classes, we are trying to understand the insights that are provided by Sri Aurobindo in his essays on the Gita, chapter number 9. This is on the aspects that are covered in chapter number 10 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is about the divine manifestations. We covered about 8 points out of the 25 which I wanted to discuss. Very briefly, Sri Aurobindo says that the message of the Gita is the gospel of the divinity in man, who by force of an increasing union unfolds himself out of the veil of the lower nature, reveals to the human soul his cosmic spirit, reveals his absolute transcendences, reveals himself in man and in all beings. This is the fundamental aspect of what the Gita talks about, is the immanence of the presence of the divinity in all manifestation.
Krishnapani sir,
Yeah.
first sentence needs some clarification. There is a statement on I of prepossession.
What is that?
First sentence in the
Okay.
theory of Vibhuti.
Okay.
The importance of this chapter of the
Okay.
Gita,
Okay.
or to an I of prepossession means what?
The importance of this chapter is very much greater than appears at first view, or to an eye of prepossession. That means you are already taking certain things for granted. It is much more than that, which is looking into the text only from the creed of the last transcendence and the detached turning of the human soul away from the world to a distant absolute. See, we normally think that moksha is going away from this whole world. Okay, as though that is the be all and end all of things, and you are no way connected with the world. See, this is again, most of these Abrahamic religions have this issue where somehow I do not know the false idea of God being somewhere else, totally disconnected with the whole of manifestation. And as a consequence of that misunderstanding, it is also assumed that human beings are born out of sin. Now, in order to correctly understand it, we have to understand that sin refers to ignorance. There is nothing like sin being committed by somebody and therefore being condemned to this kind of life. Essentially, it is ignorance. You can reverse the understanding also in one way, where Adam did not eat the fruit of knowledge. He actually ate the fruit of ignorance. What is knowledge? We need to interpret it as worldly knowledge. So he has eaten the fruit of worldly knowledge, which is actually ignorance per se. So if you are looking at with that kind of a perception, it appears that this transcendence is detached and turning the human soul away from the world to a distant absolute. That is the sentence he has used. The fact of the matter is, it is not so. Divinity is very much present in everything in manifestation, and it is for the human being who has to unfold himself out of the veil of the lower nature, out of that ignorance. He has to come out of that ignorance, and the Gita reveals to the human soul his cosmic spirit. See, one need not dwell in misery, thinking that I am small, I am very little, I am mean, I am sinful, and because that is debilitating. That idea itself is very, it drags you down, makes you smaller and smaller, instead of making you greater and greater, and revealing to you the cosmic spirit of it. See, what happens is, if we do not understand any scripture properly, there is always a danger of misunderstanding it and wallowing in the misery of ignorance, and not doing anything about it, and simply waiting for the grace of God. Now, first of all, the point is you have to deserve the grace of God, for which you need to make an effort, for which you need to prepare yourself. No, you can't say that I am a sinner and therefore I deserve a greater benefit. That is ridiculous, isn't it? Now, from any worldly point of view, can I go into an organization and say, sir, I am the most undeserving fellow. I have absolutely no knowledge of anything. I am an ignoramus and I am illiterate. And therefore, you please make me the CEO of this company. Can it ever be done that way? Why do we imagine that it happens in the case of God? Or why do we imagine that it happens in the case of divinity? You mean to say that the more miserable and more wretched you are, the greater will be the grace of God? Which is against all common sense also. So you do not go with a preconceived notion, and do not consider as though that divinity is something far away and distant and something with which we are not connected in any way. That wrong notion is dispelled in the Gita. In fact, I am collecting some very beautiful quotes from both the New Testament and the Old Testament, which clarifies this position, where one has to deserve the grace. One has to adequately prepare himself for the grace. And that starting point is to recognize the divinity in you. The starting point is to recognize the divinity in me and the divinity in everything else. It's not simply that I am divine and you are demoniac or you are evil. No. It is there in me also. So that is the message of the Gita. That the cosmic spirit reveals his absolute transcendences, reveals himself in man and in all beings. So this is actually, as Aurobindo points out, is our liberation from limited ego and our elevation to the higher nature of divine humanity, with which comes one with God by knowledge, love and will. Jnana, bhakti, and the divinity. The will of God manifests through us also to do the right action. So it is all encompassing. It is karma, jnana, and bhakti together. It is not as though they are mutually exclusive and they are step by step you proceed or anything like that. No. You need to do the right action to get the right knowledge. When you get the right knowledge, you will truly love God, because you know what He is. You know what He is essentially, fundamentally what He is. You know that. So you also to act upon the world no longer in ignorance. That is the second point which you are making. So you are no longer acting through ignorance in this world now, but in the right relation of the individual to the Supreme. This is a very important aspect which has to be noted. What is it that empowers us through the recognition of divinity? The empowerment is to act in this world not out of ignorance, but through the right relationship, but through the understanding of the right relationship between the individual and the Supreme. This is what is important. And another factor, the Gita, the third point which he brings out is that the whole of manifestation, however big, however vast, however large and grand it may be, it is still limited, because it is only a small part of his divinity that reveals it. Mamaiva amshaha, it's only an amsha. So therefore he says the mystery of the world existence is in part revealed by the Gita. Because how can how can infinity ever reveal itself fully? It cannot. So that is the fundamental issue. Any sacred text of professed or given by any religion has to be studied in the original for oneself first. However limited our understanding of it may be, however limited, partial our understanding may be, one has to read it for oneself with all sincerity, which will give an insight which is yours or mine, of that of the reader. If you go by a translator, if you go by a commentator, if you go by an interpreter, then it is limited to the interpreter's view. So why is it that we need to read several commentaries which may be contradictory to each other? Is to expand our understanding of it, but still there has to be an element of what my own understanding or my own insight is into this. And again, I am trying to tell you that what I am conveying to you, don't take that also into consideration as something very great or revealing or anything. This is to incite you, to provide the necessary goading to study on your own. See, for anything, for example, if somebody is seeking a repeated clientele or repeated audience, it only means that he is not truly conveying what he is supposed to convey. A doctor who treats a patient should treat him with the understanding that this patient should not come back to me again and again with the problem. But unfortunately, the marketing system in this world has reversed the whole thing. I want you to depend on me. I want you to use me as a support, and I want you to totally surrender your thinking to me and then come to me repeatedly as though that I am revealing something great to you. The same insight you can get it provided you make the effort. I have a good friend who is a yoga and Ayurvedic treatment he does. His fundamentally very first meeting, he says, sir, after I treat you, you should never come back to me. I am not interested in repeated clients. That is good for me in one way, because you keep paying money to me. But that is against the very spirit of treatment, the very spirit of the concept of health. Long back, I think in 1960s itself, Dr. Julian Huxley, I think, he made a very pertinent statement then itself, about 60 years back. Now the situation is 100 times worse. He made a statement that modern medicine has progressed to such a great extent that there is not a single healthy fellow in this world. There is not a single person who is healthy in this world. This is the problem. So you need to spend time on this. You need to spend time on the insights being provided and make it yourself. Make it, it should become mine. Jiddu Krishnamurti also used to insist upon this. Once you see the truth, it is not your truth or my truth. It is the truth. If you perceive what I am trying to say, then it becomes yours. It is no longer mine. You might have used my expression of it or my understanding of it. You might have initially dependent on it, but it has to be yours. It has to be yours. For that, one needs to make an effort oneself. Okay. So you see the point here. We need to understand all these things in that spirit. Then he goes on to add this fourth point is important. He will have first the knowledge of the unity of existence and the regarding eye of that knowledge as compared to the eye of prepossession. Now, through this understanding, he says the individual will have first the knowledge of unity of existence and the regarding eye of that knowledge. So that means you should not only have the knowledge of unity, but you should also have the eye of recognizing that unity in everything. I know, sir, last time, as I said, the sarcastic quote is, I love humanity, but it is people with whom I have a problem. I love all of humanity, but I have a problem with my neighbor. I have a problem with my colleague in the office. I have a problem in the house. But as a principle, I love whole of humanity, and I love those people who are in Greenland much more than anybody else, because I'll never go there, I will never see them, I'll never know anything about it. So sitting here, I can always say that I love them the most. So this is the problem with us. You have to recognize the proximity of the divinity and the nearness of that divinity in everything that is surrounding you here. And he goes on to say, he will see all around him as souls and forms and powers of the one divine being. Henceforward, that vision will be the starting point of all the inward and outward operations of his consciousness. That means every action, every thought, every emotion, every feeling has to flow from this understanding. That should be the starting point, that everybody is divine, everything is divinity. That is the spirit in which Sri Ramana Maharshi said, where is the other? How should I treat others is a very silly and foolish question if you recognize this. But the mind doesn't accept it so easily. The mind doesn't accept it so easily. Therefore, we make a million differentiations, a million divisions of everything. So that should be the start. It will be the fundamental seeing the spiritual basis of all his actions. It will be the fundamental seeing. That is the first thing that comes. As last time I said, if you can look at everybody as a Jivatma, the whole perception changes. There's a huge transformation. The first thing that should come to my mind when I see somebody is that divinity. That is a manifestation of the divinity. However covered with ignorance it may be. Then he goes on to say, but he will also see that one as the inhabitant in all. That one, that divinity, you will now see as the inhabitant in all, their self, the essential spirit within them, without whose secret presence in their conscious nature they could not at all live, move, or act, and without whose will, power, sanction, or sufferance, not one of their movements at any moment would be in the least degree possible. This is the other dimension of it. Not only seeing divinity in everything around you, you see the nature of the divinity. The nature of the divinity is such that his secret presence is what is creating everything in it, every dynamic movement, everything that is operating. Without that, will, power, sanction, or sufferance, or any movement in the least degree will be possible. That is why there is a statement which says, Pipilika di Brahma Paryantam. Pipilika means an ant. From an ant to the Brahman, everything is imbued with his spirit. So you have to recognize both of these things. And what happens as a consequence of that? This is a very important quote. All will be to him a becoming of this one universal being. Everything for that individual, all will be to him a becoming of this one universal being. Everybody is becoming that universal being. Everybody in his own way struggling to move in that direction. And that should lead to great amount of compassion. That should be the effortlessly that compassion will swell in your heart and flow out, because we are all moving in the same direction. Apparently, it may appear as though some are moving in the opposite direction. But for a person with the correct regarding eye, everybody in his own way is moving in the same direction. It appears as though somebody is moving in the opposite direction because the movement sometimes is spiral. In a spiral, if you are looking from the top, one person may be moving in this direction, the other person may be moving in that direction. But actually it is not so. They are on a spiral, on an ascending spiral. So this is the point. Then coming to the sixth point. Again, he talks about the earlier point which we have covered. I'll just mention that. But the world is only a partial manifestation of the Godhead. It is not itself that divinity. So the Godhead is infinitely greater than any natural manifestations can be. So this other side of that nature, other side of the divinity also has to be recognized. That is the reason why that famous Shanti mantra of Purnamadav Purnamidam, that is also infinite, this is also infinite. What is manifested also has that element of the divinity, but on account of several factors, it appears as limited. That is the point. Then, the spiritual seeing of God and world is not ideative only, not even mainly or primarily ideative. It is not an idea, it's not a concept, it is not a mental construct. It is not mentation in any manner whatsoever. Because this is the falsity which the mind will drag us into and put us in that. Oh, okay, sir. According to Sri Aurobindo, this concept of divinity and this concept of God is expressed very beautifully. It is a foolish statement. It is meant for the scholars and academicians to talk in those terms. We will leave that pastime to them. What did Shankara say about this particular concept of divinity, and what did Sri Aurobindo say? Are they in contradiction to each other? What consequence is it for us? As the sayings goes, if I am hungry, if you give a discourse on food and saying, sir, the Kannadiga food will be excellent, sir, you think in terms of bisibele bath or something like that. No, sir, the Andhra food has got this tangy, spicy beauty of it. How does it matter? So an aspirant of the truth should always be concerned with the truth and should recognize this fact that this is not an idea, this is not a concept, this is not in any way related to the mind. Therefore, he emphasizes that. Look at the wordings that Sri Aurobindo uses. It says, it is direct experience and as real, as vivid, near, constant, effective, intimate, as to the mind, its sensuous seeing and feeling of images, objects, and persons. The table is so real to us. The computer, the laptop is so real to us. Does divinity, the understanding of divinity, provide you with the same amount of reality, same amount of proximity, vividness, constantly being there, effective and intimate? He's not just using words just for the sake of using. He's very clear. He says it should be real. If you close your eyes, that divinity should be as real as you see objects in the world when you have your eyes open. And it should be with the same vividity, same clarity, same proximity, nearness. Just as that's why in the Vedanta they say it should be like looking at your own palm. It is so near to me and so clear to me from the point of view of normal vision. And it should be constant. It should not be something coming and going, coming and going. Whenever I have a problem, whenever I have an emotion or a desire coming out from my own thought process or my own sensuous inputs, this divinity vanishes and something else takes its place. No. And it should be effective. It should have the same effect on you as somebody touching you or somebody holding you. And intimate. There's a beautiful statement by Professor Ravi Ravindra. He says, the wholly other is intimately myself. The wholly other, that divinity, that Godhead, that Supreme, is intimately myself. So that is the intimate he is talking about. I have marked this particular point as very important because we need to go very deep into it. You have the soft copy now of this book, which Ramchandranji has, they posted it. This is on page number 68, last 5 lines. You see the 6 or 7 lines are there. You see it should have a tangible impact on us. It should have a tangible impact on us. And finally, when he comes to he is continuing this idea in the 8th point which I made. He said, spirit sees spirit. The spirit in me is seeing the spirit in you. The divinized consciousness sees God as directly and more directly, as intimately and more intimately than bodily consciousness sees matter. That should be the reality. It sees, feels, thinks, senses the divine. So now you have God thought, God force, God form. Everything is divine. Everything is divine. It is, as he says, as directly and more directly, as intimately and more intimately than bodily consciousness. The body is fundamentally our whole consciousness is concentrated on the body and the senses. Very rarely we are unconscious of the presence of the body. If you're seriously immersed in doing something, if you're seriously into some activity like giving a music recital, or if you're playing an instrument, or if you are dancing or painting, why arts become so important and take you closer to the divinity is they will help you to become self-forgetful. You will forget your body. You will forget the problems of the world for the time being. So when you are operating in that, you are sensing, he says, you are feeling, thinking, and sensing the divine in everything. He did not reveal himself and tell us about his various divine manifestations just because he wanted to enumerate and say that I am in all these things. No, that will be ridiculous, isn't it? Do you think, we should think seriously that God needs to market himself? God needs to advertise himself? That divinity, does it require to proclaim that I am present in everything? It is we have to come to it. See, that is why one of the statements of the masters is, please step out of your world and enter our world. I cannot help you. I can provide you a million things, but the actual movement from your world into our world should be your effort. Should be our effort to come to that. And the beauty of it is, it says you have to wash your feet in innocence and become childlike to enter. The innocence refers to giving up all worldly notions, worldly things, whatever you have acquired, the cunningness to differentiate between people. I treat my boss with lot of reverence and regard, and I treat my subordinate with contempt. I speak in one tone to him and I speak in a totally different tone to this fellow. This is the cunning nature of the mind. So you have to wash your feet in innocence. You can't step into it with that impurity here and become childlike. You have to become childlike. That is the meaning of it. And further, I mentioned in some other context, you can split this word innocence as in no sense. In no sense, the I should manifest. Then only you are innocent. If I know that I am innocent, it means that I am not innocent, isn't it? If I know that I am innocent, that's a contradiction in terms. In no sense, the I should manifest itself. That is the fundamental point. So, only then it is possible to understand and have a great insight into this divine manifestation, which the entire 10th chapter talks about. Then we'll come to the 9th point. I think we have spent almost more than half an hour on recapitulating, but it doesn't matter. See, it is it's not as though that, because we tend to forget. We do not have that experience of being something being real, direct experience of something being real, vivid, near, constant, effective, intimate, and so on and so forth. Therefore, it is important to repeat also. Now, coming to today's point. Now, once having come to that, Aurobindo says, but this spiritual consciousness of world existence will not see nature in the world as the normal mind of man sees it in the ignorance. So your vision is now changed. You no longer see it as a normal person sees through ignorance, or only as it is in the effects of ignorance. We see this world either through ignorance or through the effects of ignorance. And therefore, he goes on to say, this is another very important one. All in this nature that is of the ignorance, all that is imperfect or painful or perverse and repellent does not exist as an absolute opposite of the nature of Godhead. Please mark these words very, very, very carefully. All in this nature that is of the ignorance, all that is imperfect or painful or perverse and repellent does not exist as an absolute opposite of the nature of the Godhead. See, it is only an aberration. Yes, sir.
At this point, actually, either now or later on, because I was reading today this whole thing I have read, of course,
Right.
2-3 times. The whole point is in Vibhuti Yoga, he says, I am the gambling in the gambler.
Correct.
Now, whole of Mahabharata revolves around gambling and cheating.
Right.
So, that is relevant to what you are now discussing on this.
Yes.
Opposite of that, and it is not really opposite of that. So, either now or later, we should elaborate on this gambling aspect, how God is in gambling.
No, it's not God in gambling. It is not God in gambling. The very presence of God in manifestation is coming into limitation. It is coming into limitation. I am the gambling when he says that don't look at this aberration which appears to be abhorring and repellent and as a very serious flaw. It is only passing. It is only as long as ignorance is there, it is there. There is nothing like absolute bad. There is nothing like absolutely repellent or abhorring. It is only an aberration in this manifestation. See, because goodness is not the opposite of badness. Compassion is not the opposite of cruelty. You understand this point? Compassion is compassion and complete in itself. It can't be compared with anything. Goodness is goodness. It is there, that's all. Goodness is goodness. You can't compare it with anything else. And that is absolute, not this. This is not absolute. It is that goodness, that compassion, that love, that wisdom, that intelligence, that supreme intelligence. That is what is absolute, not this. All this will be there as a part, as a consequence of the whole of manifestation. In the process of manifestations, all these things come. See, very interestingly, when Uddhava and I think there is some conversation between Uddhava and Sri Krishna, in which he asks, when you knew all these things, why did you not help Yudhishthira to win the gamble, win in the gambling match in which he was involved? Why did you not do it? You knew about it. You knew that this fellow will miserably lose and he'll lose everything. And then he'll have to suffer all these consequences. You also knew that there will be a war. And you also knew that all these people will be killed. You could have simply intervened there and made, Yudhishthira win. And then they would have lost everything. Then Sri Krishna says, he never wanted me to come there. He never wanted me there at all. That was the background. See, normally what happens in all human nature also, when we are up to some mischief in our life, when we are trying to do something which we know that inherently there is something wrong in doing this. But we have a great propensity. Our predilection and propensity is to do that. Then what do you want? You don't want anybody to know. You don't want your parents to know. You don't want your wife to know. You don't want your friends to know. You don't want anybody to be a witness to it. And therefore, that itself is an indication that you are keeping God also away from it. I don't want, when I don't want human beings to know about it.
Yudhishthira didn't call Krishna.
He did want to call, not only did not call, he did not want him there.
Okay.
He was reluctant to think about it. Reluctant because his strong desire for gambling was such. As I'm trying to tell you, you have a lot of friends. I think I have some very good friends, very nice people. It's not about their being bad or good or anything. They're good people, nice people. But they would go outside and have a few drinks in the bar, and they don't want their wife or children to know about it. So what do? They spend 1 hour after drinking, going here and there, consume some, what do you call as cardamom or some mouth fresheners, and eat something, and reduce the impact of it, and somebody should not feel or smell the fumes of alcohol that he has consumed. And he would slowly call his wife also and tell, see, today I have a friend who had asked me to come to dinner, so I'm not coming to dinner, and it may be late also, you please sleep. And this fellow says, I have the keys, you don't bother, you go to sleep. And he'll simply sneak in at 11 o'clock or 11:30, and then coolly have, change his clothes and go and sleep. Why do you do this? Because you don't want, you don't recognize that divinity, you don't recognize that importance of it. So you are wantonly avoiding it, you are wantonly preventing it from happening. So he says, how can I come? He says to Uddhava, when that fellow doesn't want me at all, how can I go and help him? You mean to say that I should volunteer? That's the point I made. You have to come to his world. He has already come into your world. He's already there. But unless you recognize the divinity in him, the presence of that, how will you do it? That is what I referred earlier also in the 7th chapter, verse number 12. He says, they are in me, but I am not in them. They are in me, they are a part of me, because I am the whole of manifestation is me. So everything, everybody, anything and everything is included in that. But I am not in them because they don't recognize me. I have to recognize that presence of the divinity in me.
Yeah, it is clearer now. And on top of it, he was playing with Shaguni and not with Duryodhana.
Yes. So he was in that, he was playing Shakuni because this fellow has to be taught a lesson. He has to understand that his action is not personal. It involved the entire bloody kingdom. It involved all the kingdoms surrounding him also. That it was a great play and it was the Leela of Sri Krishna is a different interpretation of it. But what about you personally or me personally in the whole process? That is why he said none will be spared. Whoever is on the side of adharma will not be spared, whether it is Bhishma or Drona or Karna or anybody. Krupacharya, Ashwathama, all these people were very wise, very great. They had everything, except that they were on the side of adharma. Each one gave his own explanation or his own reasoning for saying that, no, sir, he has helped me so much. This is what happens in our today's politics also. I have seen this happening. You might have also seen this repeatedly happening. We have our loyalties towards a crooked politician just because he helped you in your promotion, just because he has helped you to come out of some difficult situation, or just because that fellow has given a job to your son or son-in-law or somebody. You are indebted to him for life. But we have aligned ourselves to that adharma. That is why the statement is very clear. The statement very clearly says Karta, Karayita, Chaiva, Prerakascha, For any action, there are four types of people. One is the Karta, the doer himself. Karayita, one who makes him do. Prerakaha, one who instigates. And Anumodakaha, one who gives his tacit approval. Sukrute, Dushkrute, Chaivas, Chatvara Samabhaginaha. Anything good or bad happening as a consequence, all these four are equally responsible. If we do, see, it applies at a very fundamental level. 3 days back, there were elections in municipal elections in Hyderabad, Greater Hyderabad Municipal Corporation elections. The voting percentage was 45. Whoever wins, if he is a crooked fellow or undeserving fellow, it is on account of your tacit agreement or tacit approval and your inaction of not going and voting. So you can relate this to every action. Either we are the doers, or we do on behalf of somebody, or we instigate it, whether directly or indirectly, and we give our tacit approval, whether consciously or unconsciously. Anything that is happening, good or bad, as a consequence of the actions of these people, each one is equally responsible. Chatvara Samabhaginaha. They have an equal part, all these four have an equal part in it. So how careful should we be in every action? So from a spiritual perspective, from a transcendent perspective, our life is the whole spiritual path is said to be like the edge of a sword, the razor's edge. Kshurasya dhara nishita duratyaya is a statement from the Kathopanishad, which Swami Vivekananda was very fond of saying. Uttishtata jagrata prapyavaran nibodhata kshurasya dhara nishita duratyaya. It is so sharp, and it's like you are walking on the edge of a razor. You walk on it, your feet are cut. You don't walk on it, you will fall either this side or that side. So we are in a very precarious position. A man of great understanding, a great insight into the spiritual truth will be always in a precarious position. And Krishnamurti goes one step further and says, such a man is a danger to the society. Such a person is a danger to the society. Krishnamurti was confined to his home in California for almost 5 years during the Second World War because the government of US said he should not travel anywhere because this fellow doesn't recognize states at all, he doesn't recognize countries at all, doesn't recognize nations at all. So he is a danger. In a war, he is a danger. Because even if a few soldiers listen to him and get converted to his thought or idea, then he will stop fighting, which is detrimental to the process that they have initiated. So an enlightened person is a danger to the society. So that is the point to which we are trying to understand, because he knows that all this evil is only temporary and passing and not a part of the divinity or that supreme in any manner whatsoever. And don't please consider as though this exists as an absolute opposite of the nature of Godhead. No. However imperfect or painful or perverse or repellent it may be, it is still limited. Quite some time back, I made a mention of this in a different context, and I made this statement also, that evil is self-limiting. Nobody on this earth can do unlimited damage Because evil by nature is self-limiting, whereas goodness is by nature unlimited. You can do any amount of good in this world and still it will fall short of it, and you have still more good to do. But evil per se will not allow you to do that. That is where the divinity acts. And that is the example that is given of Karna. Karna had a Shakti Astra. It could kill anybody. And Duryodhana goes on instigating that fellow, right, please use it against Arjuna once for all, the whole damn thing will be over. Just use it, just use it. Then the divinity keeps acting on him and he makes him forgetful of it and doesn't allow him to use it. And his ego also comes in between. He says, see, the commander-in-chief is Bhishma. As long as he's there, he told me not to participate in the war. So out of 18 days, 11 days gone. And as the war progressed, all dharma, all rules, regulations, everything were violated by everybody. And he was ultimately forced to use that against Ghatotkacha. Because this fellow started attacking during night also, which was not the norm. Rakshasas become more powerful during the night. So he brought all the hordes of his Rakshasas and was started attacking. No day, no night, nothing. 24/7 going on. So then they were afraid. This fellow is not even allowing us to rest, not allowing us to have food, not allowing us any respite. So Duryodhana himself says, first kill this fellow first. Then we will see later. Then he is forced to use that astra against him. So Sri Krishna had to sacrifice Ghatotkacha so that this weapon is not used against Arjuna. So you see how divinity acts. Because it acts for the greater good, and evil by definition is self-limiting. Nobody in this world, no, don't be afraid of evil completely overtaking it. It will never happen unless you actively, each one of us actively participates in it and does it. But fortunately, there are great people, there are great saints and sages who are totally anonymous and who are functioning and then who are guiding this whole of humanity. They need not necessarily guide as you and I expect. Yes, sir, if they are guiding, this particular political party should win. If they are guiding, that particular fellow should win. No. It's not at that micro level. Micromanagement is not done. Macro level, they will see that the whole thing is moving in one direction. So once a person who sees that divinity, he will understand this, that this does not exist as an absolute opposite of the nature of Godhead. Then we will come to the 10th point. But in the universe in which we live, there is a separating principle of selection and differentiation. There we see each energy, each quality which comes out for expression, laboring as if for its own hand, trying to get as much self-expression as it can in whatever way it can, and accommodating somehow as best or as worst it may that effort with the concomitant or rival effort of other energies and qualities for their separate self-expression. This is what is happening. Each one is struggling for his own self-expression in his own way, and therefore there is so much of conflict and confusion. And he uses the term as best or as worst for that self-expression. My expression could be the worst part of me. Your expression could be the best part of you. So what will happen? As a result of that, there will be conflict, there will be confusion. So many forces acting against each other. Because that is the nature of manifestation. There we see each energy, each quality which comes out for expression, laboring as if for its own hand, trying to get as much self-expression as it can in whatever way it can, and accommodating somehow as best or as worst it may, that effort with the concomitant or rival effort of other energies and qualities for their separate self-expression. Now you understand why there is this presence of evil in this world. Some very foolish questions. I answered this. I referred to this earlier also. Some people are very fond of putting some foolish questions as saying, and they assume that God has some person, God has some being living out there, sitting out there, and he is the one who is responsible for all this creation and all this nonsense that is happening. And therefore, if he is truly God, he should every day come and help me in whatever difficulty I am. Will we progress, sir? Will we progress at all as human beings if he were to intervene in everything and in anything and doing our job? It is ridiculous, isn't it? If that were the case, I will never learn in my life to walk. If that were the case, I will never learn in my life to fall. Because I should not injure myself, because God is there. So if I am injuring myself by any chance, he should come and hold me. So when he starts holding me, I will never learn to walk. This is a ridiculous argument which says that his presence should automatically wipe off all evil. It's not possible at all. Because evil is also a partial manifestation of him acting through you because of our own ignorance. Because of our own ignorance, it's happening. It is coming through that process. This is the beauty of it, of the ancient Indic tradition and ethos and culture and spiritual, wealth, which recognizes the presence of evil as a natural consequence of manifestation. No other tradition, at least to my knowledge, provides a suitable place and explanation for the presence of evil in this world. It is bound to be there. It has to be there. Like friction. In science, in physics, what is it that is keeping things stable in this world? It is friction. If there were to be no friction, moving objects would be moving and stationary objects would be completely stationary and nothing would be happening. So the presence of friction is the most important thing from the point of view of physics for the sustenance of this world. So evil is that friction.
No friction, there can't be any stationary object.
Yes, sir?
Friction, there can't be any stationary
Yeah.
object.
No. What I'm saying is if something is rooted to the ground.
But Dr. Sanda can clarify later on, Islam gives a very clear explanation for evil.
I don't know. But what I'm trying to say about fixed is something like a mountain or a tree rooted to the earth. Its presence is something which will not allow, which will be there in the absence of friction. It will be there, that's all. And everything that is moving will keep on moving. Nothing will come to a halt. But that's only, I'm giving you only as an illustration. But what I'm trying to tell you is, evil has a place. Evil is not something out of us and beyond us. It is very much a part of us. That is the reason why the Gita very clearly says that Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, divine, demoniac and human natures are all combined and they are there in us. Last time I gave this, you wanted me to narrate that story of there That the is present in everybody. We have a problem with expression of compassion. We have a problem of expression through restraint. And we have a problem through the expression of greed.
With understanding, two letter da.
Dama, Daya, Dana. So that is the problem. It is there in us. Inherently, it is there. One has to understand the nature of it and transcend it. One has to understand the nature of it.
It's a damn it.
Yeah. So that's the beauty of it. And he has clarified earlier also, saying very clearly that it is not the absolute opposite of it. It can't be that. It is there and it will go. So it gives lot of hope. It gives us lot of confidence. It gives us lot of impetus to act in the right manner. The study of that, this will happen. And he reveals another beautiful secret. This is point number 11, the last paragraph of page number 370. Such a beautiful and important thing which further clarifies the point I have made. The spirit, the divine, dwells in the struggling world nature and imposes on it a certain harmony by the inalienable law of the inner secret oneness on which the action of all these powers is based. See the beauty of it. It imposes a certain harmony by the inalienable law of the inner secret of oneness. This is the dharma. This is the rutam. This is the satyam. That is the reason why you can't do unlimited damage. That is the reason why evil is self-limiting. Because the divine, which dwells in the struggling world nature, imposes on it a certain harmony. All disequilibrium is to ascend to a higher level of equilibrium. There is a constant, churning going on. The Rajasic aspect of it, which is activity. It will always create disequilibrium, but it will take you to a higher level of equilibrium. Once you reach that, again, it will create disequilibrium. Then you reach a still higher. Then there also, they go together. The creation of disequilibrium is a part of the whole mechanism where it progressively takes you to a higher level of equilibrium. It takes you to a higher level of equilibrium.
So the purpose of, the whole idea of evolution is evolution towards goodness.
Yes.
Right?
It can't be towards anything else.
Yeah.
Another beautiful example that is given for our understanding is, see, we are so microscopic. We look at such a small part of the whole vastness of life. Krishnaji used to use this term, you are missing the vastness of life. You are stuck in a small corner of your own world, he would say. A beautiful example that is given is, there is a huge stream. There's a river flowing. A huge stream is flowing, and in between there is a stone. There is some boulder. Now what happens when the water strikes the boulder? It swirls backward. It hits the rock and it turns in the opposite direction, and there is a swirl, there is a whirlpool. Now, if we are like a droplet in that whirlpool, it appears as though we are stuck there and we are going in the opposite direction of the whole of the stream. So if you are stuck there, it will appear as though the whole thing is against you. Some evil strength is pushing you backwards and then making you go deeper and deeper into the whirlpool, and you are stuck there. Life is therefore called as a whirlpool sometimes. It is this whirlpool because you have self-limiting factor. Your ignorance is self-limiting and makes you think as though you are only a droplet. But when you merge into the whole stream, you see that the whole stream is moving in the right direction, which is to become one with the ocean, which is one with the Brahman. So the whole movement of evolution is always towards the good, towards greater and greater freedom and greater progress and evolution. But if you think you are that small speck or that droplet, then it will create a lot of distress to you. You can't hold on to your identity as a droplet in the stream. If you hold on to it, it's misery. We are making our own lives miserable. So that is the point that is being made out here, and very clearly he says there is this divine law, inalienable law of the inner secret oneness. Inner, secretly, down, deep down, inside us we are all one. That oneness is the law, that is the dharma. In the Ishavasya Upanishad, almost at the end of the Ishavasya Upanishad, I don't remember the number, but there are about 17 or 18 mantras in that. In that he says, Pushan Napavrunu, Satyasyapi hitam mukham. See, you are the truth is covered by this golden disk of the sun. The sun appears like a golden disk. And the mantra says, Pushan Apavrunu. You remove that golden disc because I want to see the truth. I want to know what for? Satya Dharmaya Drishtaye. In order to have that vision, which is born out of truth and dharma, Satya and Dharma. Hiranmayena patrena Satyasyapi hitam mukham Pushan Apavrunu Satya Dharmaya Drishtaye. See the beauty of it. So you need to come to that to recognize that inner secret, inalienable law of oneness. And that will always bring harmony. However much you may find this problem, you will find on which action of all these powers is based. All the powers he has talked about earlier, the powers, the qualities, the energies, all of that is under the subsist only under this inalienable law of the inner secret of oneness and the imposition of harmony. Harmony is imposed on that. See the great insights that are being given. If you simply read the 10th chapter, it will appear to be disparate, scattered. We can't see the underlying unity of all the aspects of the divine manifestation. This task is given to Sri Aurobindo Ghosh to write this essay to express this beauty of it. We have another 5 minutes. I'll complete one more point, which is again very important. I have marked it as important and therefore I thought I'll complete it. And he says here, one might even say that at a certain point of intensity, each force in us, force of knowledge, force of will, force of life, force of love, force of delight, can result in an explosion which breaks the shell of the lower formulation and liberates the energy from its separative action into union with the infinite freedom and power of the divine being. This is what it does. At a certain point of intensity, each force, And look at the forces he's talking about: force of knowledge, jnana, force of will. You can equate it to karma or the divine will. Force of love, the force of bhakti, love aspect of it. The force of delight, ananda. We are all seeking ananda in some form or the other, isn't it? Pleasure, enjoyment, happiness, ecstasy, bliss. Right from the smallest sensation of pleasure in the starting from the body to the highest level of bliss which we are talking about. We are all seeking that. So all these forces together can result in an explosion which breaks the shell of the lower formulation and liberates the energy from its separative action into union with the infinite freedom and power of the divine being. So it is to come to that, tipping point. Come to that tipping point where it will explode. This explosion is the truly transformative and great revelation where it tells you, where you come into direct contact with the truth, which says that what is in you and what is imbued and pervading the whole of the universe is one and the same. Is that oneness? Long back in the 1920s, Jiddu Krishnamurti made a beautiful statement. He was not even, he was still in the, what do you call as the organization created around him, and P.G. Woodhouse's brother, elder brother, was his tutor in England. He made a statement to him and said, what is liberated is not the individual, but the limited consciousness functioning through him. That is what is liberated, which realizes that it is one with the universal consciousness. It recognizes that unity. And that happens as an explosion. He says that explosion, what will it do? It breaks the shell of the lower formulation, the lower nature, or the limited aspect of our own nature, and liberates the energy, that is basically the consciousness, from its separative action. We have been always operating as a separate entity, separate being, and in our own personal interest. So that will be liberated and into union with the infinite freedom and power of the divine being. The freedom and power both are infinite of the divine being. That's what makes us come to. But it needs a certain point of intensity of each force in us. So you have to pursue that to the end. Let us assume theoretically also, which is not correct. If somebody is supposed to be pursuing the path of jnana, he has to come to the tipping point through that force. If somebody is pursuing the path of devotion, it has to come to that. Actually, these are not separate aspects. Devotion is separate. It's only the predominance in a particular lifetime of a particular force, that's all. All the forces, all energies are one. There is only one energy. Down below, as he had mentioned earlier, it appears as a different energy or a different quality or of a different nature down below, but it is one and the same. So you see, that tipping point can come through any force or a combination of all these forces. Then that explosion happens where you no longer are that limited entity functioning here. You are one with that unlimited energy and power, and as he uses the term, freedom, infinite freedom and power of the divine being. That is what you recognize. That is the beauty of it. So it's already 11:50. I think we have gone on up to 1 hour 15 minutes. We started at 10:35. It's 11:50. I'll halt here and take up a few points for discussion for the next 10 minutes. Manjula ji has asked about the meaning of Hiranmayena Patrena. Hiranmaya means gold. Hiranya means gold. Patra means a vessel or a disc. Patra is a disc which is used in most of the South Indian languages. So Hiranmayena Patrena Satyasyapihitam Mukham. It is covered by this golden disc. See, there is another esoteric meaning in this. In the whole of the solar system, the sun is called as the solar logos, or the principal deity who is responsible for everything that is happening in this world, because his presence is what brings about order in this planetary system in which we are, and that's what operates. Now, just as we have a physical body and an etheric body or an astral body and a mental body, and we talk about these koshas and shariras, in a similar manner, the physical body of the solar logos is the sun. The sun is his physical body. That is so effulgent. One cannot see it directly. That is so effulgent. The physical body of the solar logos, the what is called as the Ishvara of this planetary system, that itself is so effulgent. So how much more would be the effulgence of his true nature? Because we are not the body, isn't it? If you look at my face or somebody's face, it doesn't tell you anything that what he has inside him. But you would like to know what is inside him. That can be understood only through relationship, through communication, and through association. So that is the truth I want to see. He says, Hiranmayena Patrena Satyasyapihitam Mukham. Apihitam means which is covered. The truth is covered by this golden disc. Pushan Apavrunam. Pushan means Pusha is one of the names of the sun. If you have Dwadash Adityas, 12 Adityas are mentioned. Dwadash Adityas, Pusha is one. Pusha means one who provides sustenance and nourishment. Poshana, Pushti. So he is called as Pushan. Pushan is O Pusha. It is the vocative of the term Pusha. Apavrunu, take it away. Why? Satyadharmaya Drishtaya. Because I want to see through that vision of truth and righteousness. Satya and Dharma is not actually translatable into English. With that, for that purpose, you please remove that disc, remove that golden disc so that I can see the truth of it. That is the Hiranmayena Patrena. Hiranmaya means gold. Hiranmaya means full of gold. Hiranya means gold. Patra, as I said, is a vessel or a disc or a plate. Okay, sir. We will take up any further questions. Anything further to discuss? Yes, sir. Yes, please. Any? First, I heard some this thing. Anything to be discussed? Janak Ramji or Dr. Sana or Umesh ji?
Namaste, Krishnapani ji.
Namaste, Dr. Sana.
This is Sana.
Yeah.
Your elaborate explanation of Bhagavad Gita and giving clarity to this friction, conflict, so beautiful, I tell you. See, the more than learning what is there in Book of God, it gives us contemplative thinking, reasoning abilities. We cannot just read and say, I know.
Yes, yes.
You cannot simply say,
Very
I
much.
know that. No, I
Very
know
much, very
itself is a wrong notion.
Right.
So it is giving very in-depth clarity into what we really know, but it is so pseudo know. It is
Yeah.
really not know until you arrive at the pinnacle. That is, you said,
Yes.
the
Tipping point.
extreme, the beautiful point, I tell you. And also this friction conflicts very often taken as negative events happening in our life. But in fact, without friction, there is no flow, there is no blossoming.
Nothing.
You put a seed in somewhere in a very conducive atmosphere with all the new, it will not grow unless and until it has a friction of soil,
Yeah.
unless and until your battery leads are roughened up using paper.
That's a good example. It will not hold. It will slip away. That's a very good example. Your Sanaji, yeah, I am able to hear you now.
Yeah, there is a beautiful, see, even nuclear energy happens only when there is a friction and fission.
Yeah,
Nuclear
fission,
fission.
yeah. Yes.
No, these are all the greatest boons that happen, and unnecessarily these conflicts put us down instead of elevating us into higher consciousness.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's what truly, it's a very useful description. It's a wonderful to have joined.
It is the insights given by Sri Aurobindo. Yes, sir. Umesh ji?
Sorry, sir. I attended the entire class and I'm absorbed in it. But just in 5 minutes, I had to leave.
Okay,
so
okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry for today.
No, you can post any of your points or questions or anything.
Yes, I will.
Chat,
Yes,
and
I
we
will.
can take it up next time.
Yes. I'm still waiting for our chat and our discourse on Satyam Shivam Sundaram and the trilogy.
That linkage, that
Yes.
we will have one program on School of Ancient Wisdom for the Satyam Shivam Sundaram, the Satchidananda and Satyam Shivam Sundaram.
That's right. Yes. Thank you.
No, I just want to inform the participants. We'll post it also, and then I'll let you know. There is one Advaita Academy. The Advaita Academy people have invited me for an intense weekend program. It is called the Wisdom in the Weekend or something, where I'll be conducting a 2-hour program on Saturday evening and again 2-hour program on Sunday evening on 19th and 20th of this month. It is on a new perspective of Advaita Vedanta. So that will be an intensive 2-hour program, total of 4 hours, and I'm preparing for that. I'll post that. I would like you to, like all of you, to make it convenient to participate. Not for, see, I'm not marketing or asking, advertising about it. But I'm just telling you because it's your choice. But to make you aware of the fact that they have requested me and I've agreed to do it on 19th and 20th. Beenaji will kindly, at the appropriate time when we get the flyers and all, I'll send to her and she'll post it in the school thing also. And that would be really helpful.
When we come to the school program, we will be vaccinated at the gate.
Yeah, we are. See, there is already a vaccine, sir. The vaccine is to vibrate at a higher frequency. That acts as they have already recognized. They have recognized it that the coronavirus only vibrates at some 5 hertz or something like that. And if you are happy, you vibrate 5 times greater than that. So if we are in that state, we are already vaccinated. So don't worry about the vaccination. Ravi Gerard was asking me, and I also told 1 or 2 other participants have also personally sent messages to me. Hopefully in the new year 2021, we can physically meet in the School of Ancient Wisdom. That should be possible. Let us see how things work. I see Lalita Johnji here. Namaste, Lalita ji. Nice to see you. I participate in these programs. We would like your valuable inputs also if there is any, contribution you want to make to our study. I hope you are able to. You have to unmute yourself if you are there. I don't know. Anyway, it's already 12 o'clock. So thank you very much. We can close the session. Do we see?
Yeah. So we will have Atma Bodha on Sunday at 10 o'clock.
Yes.
As usual. And there are the school programs as well. There is a program tomorrow at 11:15. I think Ravi will post the details.
Yeah.
And then Sunday, Atma Bodha. And then Thursday again, as usual, we have the our satsang at 6:30. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And may I request all of you to say the Loka Samasta, please?
Oh, yes.
Can we have a volunteer today?
I'll do it for you if it's okay.
Yes, sure, sure.
I'll be reciting the entire mantra and then saying that I'll repeat the Loka Samastas thrice, but I'll give you the entire mantra.
Sure.
Om Swasti Prajabhyah Paripalayantam Nyayena Margena Mahim Mahishaha Go Brahmanebhyah Shubhamastu Nityam Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Close now. Thank you.